The chandeliers of the Gilded Swan threw fractured light across marble floors that cost more per square foot than most Americans earned in a month. 60 stories above Manhattan, the restaurant existed in a dimension where gravity bent to wealth, where the air itself felt heavier with the weight of old money and new fortunes colliding over plates that resembled abstract art more than food. Elena Ravencroft moved through this rarefied atmosphere like a shadow, her black uniform and white apron rendering her functionally invisible to the men and women whose net worth could fund small nations. She was 29 years old and looked like someone who had learned to disappear on purpose. Her hands were steady as she poured Chateau Margaux into crystal that rang like a tuning fork when she set the bottle down. Table 12. Always table 12 on Thursday nights. The private dining alcove with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, where deals got made and futures got bought and sold with the dessert course. She had been serving this table for 2 years now, 52 Thursdays of watching the same faces rotate through, the same dances of power and submission playing out over courses that cost what her mother's care facility charged per day. Charlotte Ravencroft, 66 years old. Alzheimer's had taken her mother's memory in pieces, cruel and methodical, like a thief who returned each night to steal one more photograph from the walls. $5,000 a month for a private room at Meadowbrook Senior Living, where the staff knew Elena's voice from the nightly calls, where they had stopped asking if she wanted to speak to her mother, because Charlotte no longer remembered having a daughter half the time. Elena's father would have found the irony bitter. Daniel Ravencroft, Brooklyn Fire Department, 32 years of service. Died running into a burning tenement on Atlantic Avenue to save residents who shouldn't have been living in a building that failed 3 safety inspections. The landlord had greased the right palms. The inspectors had looked the other way. Her father had paid the price, and the insurance company had denied the life insurance claim on a technicality buried in subsection 14 of the policy. Elena had been 19, sophomore year at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and she had learned 2 lessons that week that changed everything. The system was rigged, and silence was complicity. She joined the FBI to stop being silent. That had been 10 years ago. Before everything. Before the frame-up, the disgrace, the 2 years of living as someone else while the Bureau rebuilt their case from the inside. Before she learned that sometimes the people who taught you to speak up were the same ones who would cut out your tongue if you said the wrong thing to the wrong person. The alcove filled slowly. Augustus St. Clair arrived first, as he always did, moving with the careful dignity of a man who knew he was being watched. 72 years old, but looked 50 from a distance. Silver hair swept back, custom suit that probably cost more than Elena's annual salary back when she had been Special Agent Ravencroft instead of just Elena the waitress who smiled and nodded and remembered everyone's allergies. He owned the Gilded Swan and 8 other restaurants scattered across Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Long Island. On paper, he was a restaurateur. In reality, he was a man who had made one mistake a decade ago and had been paying interest on that mistake ever since. Elena knew this because she had spent 2 years studying every move he made, every Thursday night meeting, every envelope that changed hands in the shadows of the kitchen. She knew because 24 months ago, FBI supervisory agent Nathan Cordovan had walked into the studio apartment in Queens where she had been living under a name that wasn't hers, doing data entry for an insurance company, and waiting for her mother to die. And he had said 6 words that changed everything. "We know you were framed." Julian Thorne arrived next, and Elena felt the temperature of the room shift. 35, maybe 36, founder and CEO of Thorne Industries, which had made him a billionaire 3 times over by building cybersecurity systems that governments and corporations paid obscene amounts of money to install. He moved like someone who had never been told no in his adult life, confident bordering on arrogant, but with enough self-awareness to make it charming instead of repulsive. Dark hair starting to thread with silver at the temples, eyes that cataloged everything but revealed nothing. A smile that looked genuine until you noticed it never quite reached those cataloging eyes. He had proposed to Evangeline St. Clair 6 months ago, with a ring that had made the society pages, and a wedding date set for next spring that would merge tech money with old money in a ceremony that would probably cost more than Elena's father had earned in his entire life. Evangeline arrived on his arm, and Elena's jaw tightened reflexively. 31 years old, Augustus's only child, raised in boarding schools and finishing schools, and the kind of privilege that insulated you so completely from reality that you could walk through a minefield and never realize you were surrounded by explosives. Blonde hair that fell in perfect waves, cheekbones that belonged on magazine covers, and eyes that held all the depth of someone who had never been forced to see past the surface of anything. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't even particularly vapid. She was just untested, untempered. A person who had lived 3 decades without ever facing a problem that couldn't be solved with money or connections, or both. Elena poured water into their glasses and watched Evangeline's hand rest on Julian's arm, watched the diamond on her finger catch the light and throw rainbows across the white tablecloth. She felt something complicated twist in her chest. Not jealousy, something closer to pity. Evangeline St. Clair had no idea that her father was drowning, that the restaurants were fronts, that the man she was about to marry was being maneuvered into an investment that would launder $100 million through legitimate business channels. And she certainly had no idea that her waitress was FBI. The final guest arrived 15 minutes late, and Elena's entire body went cold, despite the climate control that kept the Gilded Swan at exactly 72 degrees year-round. Dominic Hayes, 45 years old, 6 feet tall, shoulders that suggested he still hit the gym regularly, salt and pepper hair cut short and precise, expensive watch, expensive suit, expensive cologne that probably cost more per ounce than the wine she was pouring. He moved like a predator who had learned to walk upright, smile on his face, and murder in his eyes for anyone who looked closely enough to see past the veneer. Elena had looked. She had stared into those eyes 3 years ago across an interrogation table at the FBI field office on Federal Plaza, had watched him lie under oath, had heard him testify that Special Agent Elena Ravencroft had demanded $50,000 to overlook irregularities in the financial investigation she had been conducting. She had watched her entire career evaporate in the space of a 6-hour hearing, had felt her badge get lifted and her weapons surrendered and her life dismantled piece by piece while Dominic Hayes walked out of the building and got into a town car and probably never thought about her again. Until tonight. She approached the table with the wine menu and kept her face neutral, kept her breathing steady, kept every muscle under control, because 2 years of undercover work had taught her that the body betrayed you before the mind did. Dominic glanced at her the way wealthy people glanced at service staff. The momentary flicker of acknowledgement that something animate had entered their field of vision followed immediately by dismissal. He didn't recognize her. Of course he didn't. The woman who had been Special Agent Ravencroft had worn her hair pulled back. No nonsense. Professional. Had worn minimal makeup and practical shoes, and the kind of neutral expression that came from years of training. The woman who was Elena the waitress wore her dark hair loose around her shoulders, wore makeup that changed the angles of her face, wore contacts instead of the glasses she had needed since she was 12, wore a persona so complete that even people who had worked with her for years at the bureau wouldn't have recognized her without looking twice. Nathan Cordovan had taught her that, taught her how to become someone else so thoroughly that you almost forgot who you used to be. Taught her that the best undercover work wasn't about lying. It was about becoming the lie so completely that there was no seam between the person you were pretending to be and the person you actually were. She had been Elena the waitress for so long now that sometimes she caught herself thinking in character even when she was alone. Augustus rose to greet Dominic, and Elena watched the older man's hands tremble slightly as they shook. Fear. Augustus St. Clair was terrified of Dominic Hayes, and he was good at hiding it, but not good enough. Not from someone who had been trained to read micro-expressions and body language, who had spent 7 years in the FBI learning how to see the things people tried to conceal. Dominic's voice carried the polished warmth of someone who had spent years learning how to sound trustworthy. He congratulated Julian and Evangeline on their engagement, asked about wedding plans with what seemed like genuine interest, inquired about Julian's company with the kind of specific technical questions that suggested he had done his homework. He was charming. He was likable. He was everything a successful businessman should be. And he was a monster who had destroyed Elena's career to protect a money laundering operation that funneled $400 million from criminal organizations into legitimate investments through a network of high-end restaurants across 3 states. Elena served the first course and listened. Dominic was pitching Julian on an investment opportunity: restaurant expansion, 9 new locations planned across the Northeast Corridor, targeting the same demographic as the Gilded Swan. High-end, exclusive. The kind of places where reservations required 6 months advance notice and a reputation that preceded you. $100 million for a 20% stake in the expanded operation, with projected returns that made it sound like printing money. Julian asked good questions, smart questions, questions about market saturation and demographic analysis and return on investment timelines. He wasn't a fool. He had built a billion-dollar company from nothing. He knew how to evaluate an opportunity, but he didn't know what Elena knew. Didn't know that the financial projections Dominic was showing him on the tablet were built on a foundation of fabricated revenue streams, inflated customer counts, and accounting that existed primarily to create the appearance of profitability, while the real money moved through shadows and subsidiaries and shell corporations registered in states with lax oversight. Evangeline barely paid attention to the business talk. She was planning a wedding, and her mind was clearly somewhere else, probably calculating seating arrangements or debating flower choices. She smiled at appropriate moments and nodded when Julian glanced her way and played the role of supportive fiancé with the ease of someone who had been trained since childhood to perform femininity as a kind of theater. Elena refilled water glasses and felt the recording device taped to her ribcage press against her skin with each breath. 24 months of recordings, hundreds of hours of conversation, carefully edited and documented and stored in encrypted files that Nathan Cordovan uploaded to FBI servers every Monday morning. They had enough evidence to arrest Dominic and Augustus and probably 6 other people in the operation. But Nathan wanted more. He wanted the source. He wanted to know where the $400 million was coming from, which criminal organizations were using the restaurants as laundries, who else in law enforcement or government was involved in keeping the operation protected. He wanted Senator William Kensington. Elena had heard the name for the first time 18 months ago, whispered in a corner booth at 3 a.m. when Augustus thought the staff had all gone home. She had been in the kitchen finishing inventory, and the voices had carried through the service door. Dominic and Augustus, and a third man, whose face she never saw, but whose voice she recorded on her phone, pressed against the gap in the door. The third man had talked about campaign contributions and political action committees and the importance of maintaining mutually beneficial relationships with key stakeholders in regulatory oversight. Translation: bribes. Senator William Kensington, ranking member of the Senate Banking Committee, had been taking money from the same criminal organizations that were laundering cash through the Gilded Swan and its sister restaurants. And in return, he was making sure that federal banking regulations stayed toothless enough that the money could keep flowing. Nathan had nearly lost his mind when Elena played him that recording. Careful, methodical Nathan Cordovan, who had been with the Bureau for 30 years and had seen everything and been shocked by nothing, had actually gone pale. He had made her play it 3 times, had transcribed every word himself rather than trusting it to another agent, had locked the file in a safe in his office that only 2 people in the New York field office had the combination to. Then he had told her to stay in place, keep watching, keep recording, be patient. Elena had been patient for 2 years. Tonight, that patience was going to pay off. She cleared the first course and brought out the second, and Dominic was still talking, voice warm and persuasive, painting pictures of success and profit and partnership. Julian was leaning in, interested, asking about operational details and management structure. Evangeline was checking her phone under the table, probably texting with the wedding planner. Augustus excused himself. Say something about checking on the kitchen, making sure the main course was being prepared correctly. His smile was strained, and his eyes had the hollowed-out look of a man who hadn't slept well in a very long time. Elena watched him leave the alcove, watched him glance back over his shoulder once before disappearing through the door that led to the private corridor connecting the dining room to the owner's office. She counted to 30 in her head, then caught the eye of Bernard Lefebvre, the head waiter, and gestured subtly toward the kitchen. Bernard nodded. He was 52 years old, had worked at the Gilded Swan for 15 years, and had no idea that Elena was anything other than what she appeared to be. But he liked her, trusted her enough to cover when she needed a 5-minute break to use the restroom or step outside for air. He would make sure Table 12's wine glasses stayed full while she was gone. She moved through the restaurant with practiced invisibility, nodding to other servers, skirting around tables where conversations buzzed with the self-importance of people who believed their words mattered more than anyone else's. She pushed through the service door into the corridor, waited until the door swung closed behind her and the sounds of the dining room faded to murmurs, then walked quickly toward Augustus's office. The door was closed but not locked. It never was during service, because Augustus kept his actual office at the corporate headquarters in Midtown, and used this space primarily for storage and the occasional private conversation that couldn't happen in public. Elena had been in here dozens of times over the past 2 years, usually after hours when the restaurant was closed, and the cleaning crew was the only other people in the building. She knew where Augustus kept his files, knew which drawer held the ledgers that documented the real financial transactions running parallel to the legitimate books, knew exactly how much time she had before anyone would notice she was gone. 3 minutes. She crossed to the desk and pulled open the bottom drawer. The ledgers were there, 3 of them, bound in black leather and filled with Augustus's careful handwriting. Dates, amounts, initials that corresponded to people whose real names Elena had spent months tracking down. She pulled out her phone, set it to camera mode, and started photographing pages. The door opened behind her. Augustus stood in the doorway, face draining of color, mouth opening but no sound coming out for 3 full seconds. Then his voice, barely above a whisper, cracking with terror. "What are you doing?" Elena's mind calculated options in the space of a heartbeat. She could lie, could say she was looking for cleaning supplies, or that she had gotten turned around trying to find the staff restroom, could play dumb and confused and apologetic. But Augustus's eyes were locked on the phone in her hand, on the open ledger, on the evidence that was so obvious there was no explaining it away. And in that moment, Elena made a choice that would either justify 2 years of undercover work or destroy everything. She lowered the phone slowly, deliberately, held Augustus's gaze, let him see past the waitress persona, let him see the person underneath who had been watching and waiting and building a case that would dismantle his entire world. Her voice came out steady, calm, the voice of someone who had nothing to lose. "I'm doing my job, Mr. St. Clair. The question is whether you want to keep doing yours." Augustus's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: shock, anger, fear, resignation. He sagged against the doorframe like a puppet with cut strings, and for a moment Elena thought he might actually collapse. Then he straightened, and some of the fear in his eyes shifted into something that looked almost like relief. "You're a cop." Not a question, a statement of fact, delivered with the weariness of a man who had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Elena nodded once. FBI. "And you're going to walk back into that dining room, and you're going to act like nothing happened. Because if Dominic suspects something is wrong, this operation ends right now, and you go down with him." Augustus's hands were shaking so hard he had to grip the doorframe to steady himself. "I didn't want this. Any of this. He threatened my family." "My daughter," He said if I didn't cooperate. Elena's voice cut through his spiral with the precision of someone who had heard this story 100 times from 100 different people who thought their circumstances made them special. I know. And when this is over, we'll talk about cooperation and reduced charges and what your testimony is worth. But right now, you need to go back to that table and finish dinner like everything is normal. Augustus stared at her for a long moment, and Elena could see him weighing options, calculating odds, trying to figure out if there was any possible way this ended without his world burning down. There wasn't. They both knew it. He nodded slowly, pushed himself upright, and walked back down the corridor without another word. Elena waited 30 seconds, finished photographing the last 3 pages of the ledger, returned everything to exactly where it had been, and followed him back to the dining room. Table 12 looked exactly as she had left it. Julian and Dominic were still deep in conversation. Evangeline was still on her phone. Augustus had returned to his seat, and his face had settled into something approximating normal, though his hands were still trembling slightly as he reached for his wineglass. Only Dominic seemed to notice something was off. His eyes tracked Augustus for a moment, sharp and assessing, before returning to Julian. Elena served the main course and listened to the conversation shift. Julian was asking about operational details, wanting to know specifics about suppliers and staffing and the logistics of opening 9 new locations in 18 months. Dominic had answers for everything, smooth and detailed and utterly convincing. Then Augustus's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and Elena saw his face go white. He mumbled an apology, stood, and answered as he walked toward the alcove entrance. His voice was too low to hear, but his body language screamed distress. Dominic's eyes narrowed. He watched Augustus for a moment, then turned back to Julian with a smile that didn't quite hide the calculation behind it. The main course was Wagyu beef with truffle reduction, plated to look like something out of a high-end food magazine. Elena set the plates down with practiced precision, and Evangeline finally put her phone away long enough to pick up her fork. Dominic was still talking, but his attention was divided now, part of his focus on Julian, and part tracking Augustus's movements across the room. Augustus returned to the table. His face had gone from white to gray, and there was sweat beading on his forehead despite the climate control. Dominic's voice was casual, concerned, the tone of a friend checking in. Everything all right, Augustus? Augustus nodded too quickly. Fine, just business. Nothing important. Dominic held his gaze for 3 seconds longer than necessary, and Elena could see the predator behind the businessman's mask, assessing whether his partner was becoming a liability. Then Augustus did something that changed everything. He stood up, mumbled something about checking on the kitchen personally, and walked toward the corridor that led to the private dining rooms and staff areas. But instead of turning toward the kitchen, he veered left toward the office. Elena watched him go, her pulse kicking up because this wasn't part of the plan, wasn't something Nathan had briefed her on. Augustus was deviating from script, and in undercover work, deviation meant chaos, and chaos meant blown operations and burned agents. She caught Bernard's eye and gestured toward the corridor. He nodded, understanding without needing explanation that she was following Augustus to make sure he didn't do something stupid. She reached the corridor in time to see Augustus enter his office. The door didn't close all the way. She moved closer, staying in the shadows, and heard the distinctive sound of a drawer being opened. Then Augustus's voice, speaking to someone on the phone, words tumbling out in a panicked rush. I can't do this anymore. She knows. The FBI knows. They have evidence. They have... Elena's stomach dropped. She pushed the door open and saw Augustus standing behind his desk, phone pressed to his ear, and in his other hand, he was holding a leather briefcase she had never seen before. It was open, and inside were stacks of cash, neatly bundled, each stack probably $10,000. Augustus saw her and froze. The voice on the other end of the phone was audible in the sudden silence, male and harsh. Augustus, who's there? Augustus! Augustus dropped the phone. It clattered onto the desk, and the voice kept talking, kept demanding answers. Elena's training took over. She moved fast, crossing the room and grabbing the phone before Augustus could stop her. She hit the end call button, then immediately checked the recent calls list. The number was blocked. She looked up at Augustus, and the fear in his eyes had crystallized into something that looked like acceptance. He knows. Dominic knows. That was his number. Elena's mind was racing through scenarios and contingencies and backup plans. If Dominic knew, then the operation was compromised. If the operation was compromised, then they needed to move now, tonight, before anyone had a chance to destroy evidence or flee jurisdiction. She pulled out her own phone, about to call Nathan. The office door slammed open. Dominic stood in the doorway, and the businessman mask was gone completely now. What was left was cold calculation and controlled fury, eyes locked on Elena with the kind of focus that suggested he was seeing her clearly for the first time. His voice was very quiet, very controlled, the tone of someone who had killed before and would kill again if necessary. Who are you? Elena's hand moved toward the recording device under her uniform, but Dominic was faster. He crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed her wrist hard enough to leave bruises, twisting until her phone dropped to the floor. Augustus made a sound that might have been a protest, but Dominic ignored him completely. All his attention was on Elena, and she could see him processing, calculating, putting pieces together. Then his eyes widened fractionally, and she knew he recognized her. His voice came out in a whisper that held more venom than any shout. Ravencroft. Elena didn't flinch, didn't try to deny it. 2 years of deep cover had just been burned in the space of 30 seconds, and there was no point pretending anymore. She met his eyes and let him see everything she had been hiding for 24 months. Hello, Dominic. Did you miss me? Dominic's grip on her wrist tightened, and for a moment she thought he might actually break bones. Then he released her and took a step back, his mind clearly working through implications and responses. His hand moved toward his jacket pocket. Elena's training screamed weapon, and she reacted on pure instinct. She grabbed the heavy crystal paperweight from Augustus's desk and threw it at Dominic's head. He ducked, and the paperweight shattered against the wall behind him. Elena bolted for the door. She made it 3 steps into the corridor before Dominic caught her, his hand fisting in the back of her uniform and yanking her backward. She spun, drove her elbow toward his solar plexus, but he blocked and shoved her hard against the wall. Her head cracked against plaster, and stars exploded across her vision. Dominic's face was inches from hers, and his voice was perfectly calm, perfectly controlled. The voice of someone explaining a very simple concept to a very stupid person. You're going to walk back into that dining room. You're going to smile. And you're going to pray I don't decide killing you is worth the inconvenience. Elena's vision cleared enough to see past Dominic's shoulder. Augustus was standing in the office doorway, face ashen, and behind him, drawn by the noise, were Julian and Evangeline. Julian's eyes went wide. Evangeline gasped, and Elena realized that Dominic had just made a catastrophic mistake. He had blown his own cover in front of witnesses who had no idea what they were seeing, but would definitely remember it. She let her body go limp, let Dominic think she was complying. His grip loosened fractionally. Elena drove her knee up into his groin as hard as she could. Dominic's grip released completely as he doubled over, and Elena ran. Not toward the dining room, toward the private alcove where table 12 sat empty, where the briefcase full of cash was still sitting on Augustus's desk, where evidence was waiting to be secured. She burst back into the office, grabbed the briefcase, and ran for the service elevator at the end of the private corridor. Behind her, Dominic was shouting, and there were footsteps, and somewhere an alarm was going off because someone had hit the panic button that connected directly to private security. Elena slammed her hand against the elevator call button and prayed it would arrive before Dominic did. The elevator dinged, the doors opened, Standing inside was a man in his late 50s, gray hair, sharp suit, federal badge clipped to his belt. Nathan Cordovan took one look at Elena's face, at the briefcase in her hand, at Dominic rounding the corner behind her with murder in his eyes, and his own hand moved to the weapon holstered at his hip. His voice carried the absolute authority of 30 years in federal law enforcement. "Dominic Hayes, FBI. Put your hands where I can see them." Dominic skidded to a stop. His eyes went from Nathan to Elena to the briefcase, and Elena watched him calculate odds and realize he had lost. Behind Dominic, Augustus appeared, and Julian, and Evangeline, all of them staring at the scene playing out in the corridor like they had stumbled into a movie and couldn't figure out which genre it was. Nathan's voice again, harder this time. "Hands, now!" Dominic's hands came up slowly, and Evangeline St. Clair, who had been raised to be gracious and polite and accommodating in all circumstances, who had probably never raised her voice in anger in her entire privileged life, looked at Elena with an expression that was equal parts confusion and betrayal, and said the words that would haunt Elena for months afterward. "What did you do?" Elena opened her mouth to answer, but before she could form words, Evangeline stepped forward and slapped her across the face, hard enough to snap her head to the side. The sound echoed down the corridor like a gunshot. Elena's cheek burned. The briefcase dropped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, hitting the floor with a thud that sounded very loud in the sudden silence. Evangeline's voice was shaking, high and thin. "You were spying on us? On Julian? Were you trying to steal from us?" Julian's hand was on Evangeline's arm, pulling her back, but his eyes were on Elena with an intensity that suggested he was seeing something he hadn't seen before. Elena straightened slowly, touched her burning cheek, and felt something inside her snap. 2 years of playing waitress, of swallowing insults and fetching plates and pretending to be invisible. 2 years of watching these people live in their bubble of wealth and privilege while her mother forgot her name and her father's death went unavenged, and the system that was supposed to protect people kept protecting predators instead. She reached up and pulled the recording device from under her uniform, held it up so everyone could see it. Her voice came out perfectly steady, perfectly calm. The voice of Special Agent Elena Ravencroft, FBI, who had been gone for 3 years, but had never actually left. "My name is Elena Ravencroft. I'm a federal agent. I've been undercover in this restaurant for 2 years. And the man you're about to marry, Evangeline, is being used as a patsy to launder $100 million through a criminal enterprise that your father has been running with Dominic Hayes for the last decade." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Nathan's radio crackled, and a voice came through saying that tactical teams were in position at all exits, and Dominic Hayes, who had destroyed Elena's career and walked free for 3 years, who had built an empire on corruption and violence and stolen lives, laughed. It was a dry, bitter sound that held no humor at all. His voice was very quiet. "You think you've won? You have no idea how deep this goes. No idea who you're really dealing with." Nathan stepped out of the elevator, weapon drawn, and pointed at center mass. "Then I guess you're going to have a lot to tell us downtown." Elena picked up the briefcase, hands steady despite the adrenaline crash trying to drag her under. She looked at Augustus, who was leaning against the wall like a man who had just run a marathon. Looked at Julian, whose sharp mind was clearly trying to piece together implications. Looked at Evangeline, whose face had gone from angry to terrified to lost in the space of 30 seconds. And she felt nothing but exhaustion. Nathan was reading Dominic his rights, was calling for backup, was handling everything with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Elena's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out with shaking hands. The text was from an unknown number, just 4 words. "Your mother is safe." She stared at the message, mind trying to process implications, trying to understand who had sent it and why and what it meant. Then Dominic's voice, directed at her, cutting through everything.
You should have stayed dead, Ravencroft. Would have been safer for everyone. And Elena looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. He wasn't scared. He wasn't worried about arrest or prosecution or the evidence they had accumulated. He was confident, which meant he knew something she didn't. The FBI field office on Federal Plaza smelled like burnt coffee and institutional desperation. Elena sat in interview room 3, the same room where Dominic Hayes had testified against her 3 years ago, and tried not to see the irony as too obvious. Her cheeks still throbbed where Evangeline had slapped her. The burn had faded from angry red to a duller purple that would probably turn yellow by morning. Nathan had offered ice. She had declined. The pain kept her focused, kept her from thinking too hard about the text message that had appeared on her phone 30 seconds after Dominic's arrest. Your mother is safe. 4 words that meant someone had been watching Charlotte. Someone had known Elena would need reassurance at that exact moment. Someone who understood leverage and pressure points and how to weaponize a 29-year-old woman's greatest vulnerability. Nathan sat across from her, tablet open, reviewing the photographs she had taken of Augustus's ledgers. His reading glasses had slid halfway down his nose, and he kept pushing them back up with one finger, a nervous habit she had watched him develop over 2 years of running this operation. He was 58 years old and looked 70 tonight, exhaustion carving new lines around his eyes and mouth. His voice was carefully neutral, the tone of someone trying very hard not to let emotion cloud judgment. You were compromised. Augustus made you. Elena's throat was dry. She had drunk 3 cups of water since arriving at Federal Plaza 40 minutes ago, and her mouth still felt like sandpaper. He walked in while I was photographing the ledgers. I made a tactical decision to bring him in rather than aboard. Nathan's eyes flicked up from the tablet, and something in his expression suggested he was remembering other operations that had hinged on similar split-second choices. And if he had called Dominic immediately, instead of cooperating? Elena's hands were flat on the table, fingers spread to stop them from trembling. Then Dominic would have destroyed evidence and fled, and we would have lost 3 years of work. Augustus was terrified. I leveraged that. Nathan removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Outside the interview room, the field office was chaos. Tactical teams had hit 4 other restaurants simultaneously at 9 p.m., 30 minutes after Dominic's arrest. Coordinated raids designed to grab evidence before anyone had time to sanitize records or warn associates. Elena had been in the command center when the confirmations started rolling in. Search warrants executed, subjects detained, evidence secured. They had Augustus St. Clair, Dominic Hayes, and 8 other restaurant owners in custody. They had 12 locations worth of financial records. They had 2 years of surveillance recordings, wire transfers, and documents showing exactly how $400 million had moved through the system over a decade. What they didn't have was Senator William Kensington. Nathan's voice pulled her back to the present. Dominic hasn't said a word. Lawyered up the second we got him in the car. His attorney is Maxwell Brennan. Elena felt her stomach drop. Maxwell Brennan was one of those lawyers who appeared whenever powerful people needed someone to make problems disappear. Federal prosecutors hated him because he was very good at his job and had no discernible moral compass. Defense attorneys respected him because he won cases that should have been unwinnable. He charged $5,000 per hour and was worth every penny if you had the kind of problems that required his particular skill set, which meant Dominic had resources, deep resources, the kind that didn't appear overnight. Nathan continued, voice flat. Brennan is already filing motions. Illegal search, entrapment, violation of civil rights. He's throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. Elena's mind was running calculations. Brennan couldn't make the evidence disappear. The ledgers were real. The recordings were admissible. The paper trail was documented and cross-referenced. But he could delay, could tie things up in procedural challenges for months or years. could wear down prosecutors until they accepted plea deals that let Dominic walk with minimal consequences. Unless they flipped someone. Her eyes met Nathan's, and she saw the same calculation happening behind his tired gaze. Augustus. Nathan nodded slowly. He's in interview 2 with his attorney.
Public defender, fresh out of law school. Looks like she's about 12 years old. He asked to speak with you specifically. Elena's pulse kicked up despite her exhaustion. When? Nathan glanced at his watch. 20 minutes ago. I told him I needed to debrief you first. He was giving her time to prepare.
Time to shift from the person who had been Elena the waitress to the person who was Special Agent Ravencroft, who understood interrogation dynamics and pressure points and how to break someone who was already halfway broken. She stood up. Her legs felt unsteady. Adrenaline crashed, trying to drag her down into sleep or collapse, or both. She had been awake for 19 hours, had served dinner and blown her cover and watched an operation culminate in the space of 90 minutes. Her body wanted rest. Her mind knew there wouldn't be any for a long time. Nathan handed her a file folder, thick with documentation. Everything we have on Augustus. His initial arrest record, financial statements, family background. Use what you need. Elena took the folder and felt the weight of 2 years compress into paper and ink. What about Evangeline? Nathan's expression shifted into something that might have been sympathy. She's in the waiting area with Julian Thorne. Both gave preliminary statements. Evangeline is convinced you're a criminal who infiltrated the restaurant to spy on her fiancé's company. Julian is... He paused, choosing words carefully. Less certain. Elena thought about Julian's eyes in those last moments at the Gilded Swan. The way he had looked at her like he was solving a puzzle and didn't like the picture emerging. He's smart. He'll figure it out. Nathan's voice held a warning. He's also a billionaire with connections and resources. If he decides we've wronged him or his fiancée, he can make our lives very complicated. Elena was already moving toward the door. Then we better make sure the truth is on our side. Interview room 2 was identical to 3, except for the occupants. Augustus St. Clair sat hunched in a metal chair, hands clasped on the table, looking like he had aged a decade in the past hour. His expensive suit was rumpled, his silver hair disheveled, and his eyes held the hollow stare of someone watching their life disintegrate in real time. Next to him sat his attorney, a young black woman in a department store blazer, who was indeed taking notes on a legal pad with the intensity of someone who knew she was in over her head, but refused to show it. The attorney looked up as Elena entered, and her voice was professionally crisp, despite obvious nervousness. I'm Amanda Reeves, Mr. St. Clair's counsel. I need to state for the record that my client is cooperating voluntarily, and any statements made tonight are contingent upon formal immunity agreements being... Augustus's voice cut through hers, rough and desperate. Is my daughter safe? Elena closed the door and remained standing. Dominance positioning, basic interrogation technique, establishing that she controlled this space and everything that happened in it. Evangeline is in the waiting area. She's unharmed. Augustus's shoulders sagged with relief, and Elena watched his attorney's eyes narrow fractionally. Amanda Reeves might be young, but she was smart enough to recognize an emotional vulnerability when she saw one. Elena opened the file folder and extracted a single photograph, placing it on the table facing Augustus. It showed him and Dominic Hayes in what appeared to be a parking garage, Augustus handing over a briefcase, while Dominic's face was visible in profile. The timestamp read 18 months ago. Her voice was calm, factual, the voice of someone presenting evidence rather than making accusations. March 15th, 2 years ago. You met Dominic Hayes at the parking structure beneath Sterling Tower. The briefcase contained $475,000 in cash. Payment for money laundering services rendered through the Gilded Swan. This was the first time we photographed you directly engaging in the conspiracy. Augustus stared at the photograph like it was a snake that might bite him. Amanda Reeves was scribbling notes, her pen moving fast across the legal pad.
Agent Ravencroft, my client has already indicated willingness to cooperate. We're here to discuss terms of immunity, not to... Elena placed another photograph on the table. This one showed Augustus with a different man, older, distinguished, someone whose face was familiar from television and newspaper coverage.
Senator William Kensington, ranking member of the Senate Banking Committee, standing next to Augustus at what looked like a charity gala, both men smiling for the camera. Augustus's breathing accelerated. His hands, which had been clasped loosely on the table, tightened until knuckles went white. Elena's finger tapped the photograph. This was taken at the Metropolitan Museum Gala 14 months ago. You donated $200,000 to Senator Kensington's re-election campaign. Except the money didn't come from your legitimate business accounts. It came from the laundering operation. Dominic routed it through 3 shell corporations to make it appear clean, but we traced the origin. Amanda Reeves stopped writing. Her voice had lost some of its professional crispness. Are you saying my client is being investigated for campaign finance violations, in addition to money laundering? Elena didn't look at the attorney. Her eyes stayed locked on Augustus, watching him process implications.
I'm saying your client is facing RICO charges, conspiracy, money laundering, fraud, and potentially being an accessory to whatever crimes the $400 million we're investigating originally financed. If that money came from drug cartels, or human trafficking, or weapons sales, then Augustus St. Clair is legally responsible for everybody those operations produced. The color drained from Augustus's face. His voice came out as a whisper. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know where the money came from. Elena pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, shifting dynamics from interrogator to potential ally. Then tell me what you did know. Augustus's attorney put a hand on his arm, but he shook her off. The story came out in fragments, disjointed and rambling, the confession of a man who had been carrying weight for too long.
10 years ago, Augustus had owned 3 restaurants and had plans to expand. He had also developed a gambling addiction that he hid from his wife and daughter, a problem that started small and metastasized until he was losing hundreds of thousands of dollars in underground poker games and offshore betting accounts. The legitimate business was profitable, but not profitable enough to cover losses that were spiraling into millions. He had borrowed from loan sharks, had tried to keep the businesses afloat while paying exorbitant interest, had been 2 weeks away from bankruptcy when Dominic Hayes had appeared with an offer that seemed like salvation. Dominic had known things about Augustus that no one should have known. Knew about the gambling debts, knew about the offshore accounts, knew that Augustus's daughter was applying to Harvard and that her father was about to lose everything, including the ability to pay for her education.
Dominic had offered to make the debt disappear. $3 million, wiped clean, in exchange for one small favor. Let us use your restaurants. Augustus's voice cracked as he described the mechanics. Fake reservations that showed higher customer counts than actual traffic. Inflated food costs that made expenses appear larger on paper. Cash payments that never got properly documented. Shell corporations that owned shell corporations that eventually traced back to Dominic's network. It had started small, maybe $200,000 per quarter, running through the Gilded Swan's books. Then Dominic had asked Augustus to open more restaurants, had provided the capital, introduced him to investors who turned out to be money launderers themselves, expanded the operation from 3 locations to 12 across 3 states. The volume increased. $200,000 per quarter became $2 million. The restaurants were profitable on paper, which made them perfect for hiding the money that flowed underneath. Elena listened without interrupting, her mind cataloging details and cross-referencing against evidence they had already collected. Most of what Augustus was describing matched their surveillance, but there were gaps, pieces that didn't fit. She waited until he ran out of words, then asked the question that mattered. When did you find out about Senator Kensington? Augustus's eyes closed. His hands were shaking badly now, and his attorney looked like she wanted to stop the interview, but knew her client was too far gone to listen. 6 years ago. Dominic introduced us at a fundraiser. The senator was running for re-election, needed campaign contributions.
Dominic said it was important to maintain good relationships with people who oversaw banking regulations. I thought it was just normal political donations. Elena's voice was very quiet. What changed your mind? Augustus opened his eyes, and the despair in them was absolute. 3 years ago, there was an FBI investigation. Someone was looking into financial irregularities at the restaurants. Dominic said it would be handled. 2 weeks later, the investigation was closed. No charges filed. The agent running it was accused of corruption and forced out. Elena felt ice spread through her chest. Her own voice sounded distant in her ears. Do you remember the agent's name? Augustus's gaze finally met hers, and recognition dawned. You. It was you. The silence that followed was broken only by Amanda Reeves's pen scratching across her legal pad, documenting everything for the record that would eventually become exhibits in a federal trial. Elena's training told her to maintain professional distance, to keep emotion out of the room, to treat this like any other interview. But 3 years of anger and humiliation and watching her career burn while the people responsible walked free were suddenly very present in her throat. Her voice came out harder than intended. Dominic Hayes framed me to protect this operation. He planted evidence, testified under oath that I was corrupt, destroyed my career. And you knew. You knew, and you said nothing. Augustus flinched like she had struck him. If I had come forward, he would have killed my daughter. He showed me photographs of Evangeline at school, at her apartment, going to classes. He said accidents happen to people who can't keep their mouths shut. What was I supposed to do? Elena wanted to scream at him that he was supposed to have a spine, that he was supposed to care about something beyond his own family, that his silence had cost her everything. But she had been doing this job long enough to know that moral righteousness didn't win cases. Evidence did. She pulled another photograph from the folder. This one showed Senator Kensington exiting a building in Washington, D.C., date stamped 4 months ago. The senator has been meeting with Dominic regularly. We have surveillance showing them together at least once a month for the past 2 years. What were they discussing? Augustus shook his head. I don't know. Dominic stopped including me in those conversations after you were forced out. I think he was worried I would become a liability. Elena leaned forward. But you heard things. Pieces of conversation. Names, details. Something. Augustus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant, clearly trying to remember fragments. There were others. Not just the restaurants. Dominic mentioned construction companies, real estate developments, something about municipal contracts. He said the senator was useful because he could influence federal grants and regulatory oversight. I didn't understand all of it. Elena felt the scope of the investigation expanding beyond what they had anticipated. If Dominic was running multiple laundering operations across different industries, then the $400 million was just one stream in a larger river. She looked at Amanda Reeves. Your client needs full immunity. Everything he's described tonight puts him squarely in RICO territory. If he testifies, he'll need witness protection for himself and his daughter. Amanda's expression suggested she had already reached the same conclusion. We'll need that in writing before my client provides any additional statements. Elena stood up. Then I suggest you start drafting terms. Because in about 6 hours, the U.S. attorney is going to start making decisions about who gets deals and who gets indicted. Your client has information we need, but he's not the only person we're talking to tonight. She left the interview room and found Nathan in the observation suite next door, watching through the one-way glass. His face was grim. His voice confirmed what she had already guessed. We've got problems. Elena's exhaustion was trying to drag her under, but adrenaline kept her upright. How bad? Nathan turned away from the glass.
Maxwell Brennan filed an emergency motion an hour ago, claiming Dominic's arrest was illegal. Judge Hendricks is reviewing it now. If she grants it, Dominic walks on the technicality, and everything we seized gets suppressed. Elena's mind went blank for a second, shock overriding processing. That's insane. We had probable cause, we had warrants, everything was by the book. Nathan's expression suggested he agreed, but had seen worse. Brennan is arguing that your undercover status was legally questionable because you were operating under false pretenses without proper authorization. He's claiming entrapment and civil rights violations. Elena felt the floor tilt slightly. She grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. I had authorization. You authorized the operation. Nathan's voice was very careful. I authorized you to gather intelligence. I didn't have explicit approval from the director's office for a 2-year deep cover operation involving federal agents working in private businesses under false identities. The implications hit Elena like cold water. Nathan had been running a gray area operation, pushing boundaries on what was technically legal, betting that results would justify methods. It was the kind of calculated risk that senior agents took when they believed the target was worth the exposure. But if a federal judge decided the operation crossed lines, then everything they had collected over 2 years became fruit of the poisonous tree. Inadmissible. Worthless. And Dominic Hayes walked free. Elena's voice was hollow. You're telling me we did everything right? Collected evidence that proves a multi-million-dollar conspiracy involving a sitting senator, and it might all get thrown out because of paperwork? Nathan met her eyes, and she saw something in his expression that looked like guilt. I'm telling you that I made choices about how to run this operation, and those choices might have consequences. If they do, that's on me, not you. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to find some angle or loophole or solution that made this work. But she had been an agent long enough to know that sometimes the system failed not because of corruption or incompetence, but because the rules designed to protect citizens from government overreach also protected criminals from legitimate investigations. Her phone buzzed. She pulled it out, expecting another text from an unknown number. Instead, it was a news alert. Breaking. FBI raids high-end restaurants in money laundering investigation. Senator Kensington denies any wrongdoing. Nathan saw her screen and swore quietly. News had leaked, which meant someone inside either the Bureau or the U.S. Attorney's Office was talking to reporters, which meant Dominic's people knew exactly what evidence had been seized and could start destroying anything the raids hadn't captured. Elena opened the news article and skimmed details. The reporting was surprisingly accurate, describing the raids, mentioning Dominic Hayes by name, and including a statement from Senator Kensington's press office categorically denying any involvement in criminal activity. Then she saw the final paragraph, and her blood went cold. The article mentioned an FBI agent who had been working undercover in one of the restaurants. It didn't name her, but it described her as a disgraced former agent who was previously dismissed from the Bureau for corruption charges and has been seeking reinstatement by manufacturing evidence against legitimate businessmen. The story Dominic had used to destroy her 3 years ago was being recycled and distributed to every major news outlet in the country. Nathan read over her shoulder and his face went pale. That's Brennan's strategy. He's not just fighting this in court, he's trying you in the media. Elena's hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. 3 years ago, she had been destroyed by lies. She had lost her career, her reputation, her identity. She had spent 2 years rebuilding from nothing, working a cover that required her to be invisible and anonymous. Now she was about to be dragged into the spotlight again, except this time with national media attention. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Then we go public with the truth. We hold a press conference, show the evidence, explain the operation. Nathan shook his head. We can't. Judge Hendricks issued a gag order an hour ago. Neither side can discuss the case publicly until her ruling on the suppression motion. Elena stared at him, trying to process the impossibility of the situation. They had evidence. They had witnesses. They had documentation that could dismantle a criminal conspiracy. But they couldn't use any of it, couldn't defend themselves, couldn't even correct the lies being spread about her. The observation room door opened, and a young agent Elena vaguely recognized from the financial crimes unit stuck his head in. "Ravencroft, there's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent." Elena and Nathan exchanged glances. At 11:30 at night, in the middle of a federal investigation, urgent visitors were rarely good news. She followed the agent down the corridor to the waiting area and stopped dead when she saw who was sitting in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs. Julian Thorne looked up, and his eyes held the same analytical intensity she remembered from Table 12 at the Gilded Swan. He had ditched the suit jacket but still wore the dress shirt and slacks, and he looked like someone who had spent the past 3 hours thinking very hard about implications. He stood when he saw her. "Agent Ravencroft, we need to talk." Elena's mind was racing through protocols and regulations about speaking to witnesses without attorneys present. "Mr. Thorne, this really isn't the appropriate time or place. You should direct any questions through—" Julian's voice cut through her objections with the confidence of someone who was used to getting what he wanted. "I know about the suppression motion. I know Maxwell Brennan is trying to get your evidence thrown out. And I know you're about to lose this case because you don't have enough to connect Dominic to Senator Kensington." Elena felt Nathan's presence behind her before she saw him. His voice was carefully neutral. "Mr. Thorne, I'm Supervisory Special Agent Nathan Cordovan. Anything you want to discuss should go through proper channels with your attorney present." Julian's eyes flicked to Nathan, then back to Elena. "I don't need an attorney because I'm not a suspect. I'm a witness who has information you need. Specifically, information about the software Dominic Hayes hired my company to install in Augusta St. Clair's restaurant network." Elena's exhaustion evaporated. Her mind was suddenly sharp, focused, processing what Julian was offering. "You have evidence of the financial manipulation?" Julian pulled a thumb drive from his pocket. "I have 6 months of network logs showing backdoor access to accounting software that my company installed but didn't program. Someone inserted code designed to mask transactions and generate false reports. I didn't know what it was for at the time, but after tonight—" He paused, weighing words. "I should have asked harder questions." Nathan moved forward, hand outstretched for the drive. "Mr. Thorne, if this evidence is relevant to an ongoing federal investigation, we need to examine it immediately." Julian held the drive just out of reach. "And I'll give it to you. But first, I need something from Agent Ravencroft." Elena's guard went up immediately. "We don't make deals with witnesses, Mr. Thorne. If you have evidence, you're legally obligated to provide it." Julian's expression suggested he expected that response. "Then consider this a professional courtesy between someone who had his trust violated and someone who apparently spent 2 years lying to everyone in that restaurant. I want to know why. Why go through all of this? Why risk your career on an operation that might get thrown out on a technicality?" Elena stared at him, trying to figure out if this was genuine curiosity or some kind of manipulation. Julian Thorne was a billionaire who had built an empire on understanding systems and exploiting inefficiencies. He wasn't asking questions out of idle interest. Her voice was carefully controlled. "Because 3 years ago, Dominic Hayes destroyed my career to protect a criminal conspiracy. He framed me, lied under oath, and walked away while I lost everything. This operation was about getting justice, not revenge. Justice." Julian studied her for a long moment, and Elena had the uncomfortable feeling of being analyzed by someone who processed information faster than most people could speak. "And Evangeline? What about her?" Elena felt something twist in her chest. "Your fiancée is innocent. She had no knowledge of her father's crimes. Neither did you, as far as our investigation showed." Julian's jaw tightened. "But you let us believe we were being targeted. Let Evangeline think you were spying on me, on my company.
She slapped you because she thought you were trying to steal corporate secrets. Elena's cheeks still throbbed with the memory. She slapped me because she was defending someone she loved. I understand that. I don't blame her for it. Julian handed Nathan the thumb drive, and his voice was flat, empty. The wedding is off. I called Evangeline an hour ago and told her I can't marry into a family that's connected to federal crimes. She hung up on me. Nathan disappeared immediately, presumably to get the drive to their digital forensics team, which left Elena alone with Julian in a waiting area that suddenly felt very small. Julian's voice dropped lower. Did any of it matter? The conversations, the dinners, the 2 years you spent at that restaurant? Did you care about any of the people you were lying to? Elena thought about Bernard, the head waiter who had covered for her dozens of times and had no idea why. Thought about the other servers who had become something like friends over 2 years of shared shifts. Thought about Augustus's terror when he realized what was happening. Thought about Evangeline's face, betrayed and lost. Her voice was quiet. Every single day. I cared every single day. That's what made it work. Julian nodded slowly, like she had confirmed something he already suspected. Evangeline is going to hate you for a long time. Probably forever. I thought you should know that. He walked toward the exit without waiting for a response, and Elena stood alone in the waiting area, wondering if getting justice was worth the cost of becoming the person everyone else believed you were. Nathan found her 10 minutes later, his face transformed. The exhaustion was still there, but underneath it was something that looked like hope. The thumb drive is legitimate. Julian's network logs show that Dominic accessed the accounting software remotely from an IP address we've already traced to his office. We can prove he was manipulating financial records. Elena felt her pulse kick up. Enough to overcome the suppression motion? Nathan's smile was grim. Enough to add computer fraud charges, and enough to connect him directly to the conspiracy. Maxwell Brennan is going to have a much harder time arguing entrapment when his client was actively committing crimes independent of your undercover operation. They returned to the command center, where the night shift was processing evidence from the raids. Bankers' boxes full of documents, hard drives being imaged, financial analysts working through spreadsheets trying to trace money flows. It was organized chaos, the kind of controlled frenzy that happened when a major case broke open. Elena's desk was buried under files. She cleared a space and opened Augustus's folder again, looking for details she might have missed. The timeline was starting to clarify. Dominic had been running this operation for at least 10 years, maybe longer. The restaurants were just one component. Augustus had mentioned construction and real estate. That suggested multiple revenue streams, multiple industries compromised. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. He's not the apex. Look deeper. Elena stared at the message, pulse accelerating. Someone was feeding her information. Someone who knew details about the investigation. Someone who wanted her to keep digging. She showed the text to Nathan. His face went dark. That's the second message from this number. First one said your mother was safe. Now this. Someone is watching the investigation. Elena's mind was running through possibilities. Could be an informant? Someone inside Dominic's organization who wants out? Nathan looked skeptical. Or it's misdirection. Someone trying to make you waste resources chasing shadows while the real targets escape. Elena didn't have an answer, but something about the messages felt genuine. Felt like someone who understood the scope of what they were investigating and was trying to guide her towards something specific. She pulled up the case files on Senator Kensington. The surveillance photographs showed him meeting with Dominic regularly, but they didn't have recordings of those conversations. Didn't have documentation of what was being discussed. The campaign contribution from Augustus was suspicious, but not conclusive. Wealthy people donated to politicians all the time. Proving that Senator Kensington knew the money came from criminal sources was going to be almost impossible without someone willing to testify. which meant they needed to flip Dominic. And Maxwell Brennan's presence meant that wasn't going to happen. Elena was staring at Kensington's photograph when another thought occurred to her. She pulled up the timeline of her own investigation 3 years ago. The dates, the evidence she had collected, the moment when everything fell apart. She had been investigating financial irregularities at multiple restaurants, had traced connections back to shell corporations, had requested warrants to examine bank records, and then Dominic had come to her office one evening with concerns about her methodology, had questioned her analysis, had asked to see her files. She had shown him everything. 2 days later, the complaint had been filed accusing her of accepting bribes. Elena's hands went cold as she realized the implications. Dominic hadn't just framed her. He had used her own investigation to identify what evidence existed and then systematically destroyed it before moving against her. Her voice came out hoarse. "Nathan, 3 years ago when I was forced out, what happened to my case files?" Nathan looked up from his tablet. "Standard protocol. Everything was sealed pending internal investigation." "Why?" Elena was already moving toward the records room. "Because Dominic had access to them. He would have reviewed everything during the investigation, which means he knew exactly what evidence I had collected and could make sure it disappeared." Nathan followed her, understanding dawning. "You think he destroyed your original investigation?" Elena was pulling file boxes from shelves, searching for case numbers from 3 years ago. "I think he made sure there was nothing left that could connect him to the restaurants. My disgrace wasn't just about removing me. It was about removing everything I had found." She located her old case files and pulled them from the shelf. The boxes were lighter than they should have been. She opened the first one and found exactly 3 documents. Her initial case assignment, a memo requesting warrants that had been denied, and the formal complaint accusing her of corruption. Everything else was gone. Hundreds of hours of investigation, surveillance photographs, financial analysis, witness interviews, all of it missing. Nathan's face was ashen. "This is a problem. If someone purged your files, that's obstruction of justice. But it also means we can't use any of that original evidence even if we could recover it." Elena sat down hard on the floor, surrounded by empty file boxes, and felt 3 years of anger crystallize into something colder and sharper. Dominic didn't just frame me. He erased me. Made sure there was nothing left to find. Her phone buzzed. The unknown number again. "Check the basement archives. Box 2847. Someone missed one." Elena showed Nathan the message. They stared at each other for a long moment, both calculating risks. Then they went to the basement. Box 2847 was in the oldest section of the archives, the area where cases from before digital record-keeping got stored and gradually forgotten. Elena pulled it from the shelf and opened it with hands that were shaking despite her best efforts. Inside was a single folder. Her name on the tab, case number from 3 years ago. She opened it and found a flash drive taped to the inside cover. Nathan pulled out an evidence bag and sealed the drive without touching it. "We take this to digital forensics immediately. If this is legitimate, it's potentially compromised evidence, and we need to establish chain of custody." They returned to the main floor. The night had bled into early morning, and the command center was still full of agents working through evidence. Elena felt like she had been awake for days, exhaustion and adrenaline mixing into something that made thinking difficult. The digital forensics team took the flash drive into their lab. Elena and Nathan waited in the observation room, watching through glass as a technician connected the drive to an isolated computer and began examining contents. 20 minutes later, the technician emerged with printouts. "It's your original case file. Financial analysis, surveillance logs, witness interviews, everything. Looks like someone made a backup before the official files were purged." Elena took the printouts with hands that trembled. Her own handwriting from 3 years ago. notes she had made while building a case that had ultimately destroyed her. Except now she was reading those notes with 2 additional years of context and understanding, and she saw something she had missed the first time.
Her original investigation had identified 13 restaurants involved in the laundering operation. The current investigation had found 12. One was missing. Elena's finger traced the name on the printout. The Sterling Room, 47th floor, Columbus Circle. Augustus St. Clair listed as managing partner, but actual owner is a shell corporation registered in Delaware. Nathan leaned over her shoulder. That's not on our current list.
We've been focusing on the 12 locations we knew about. Elena's mind was racing. Because Dominic made sure the Sterling Room wasn't flagged when he purged my files. He wanted us to find the others. But this one... She paused, understanding clicking into place. This one is where the real money moves. The others are cover. Nathan pulled out his phone and started making calls, waking up junior agents and tactical teams, organizing a warrant application for emergency execution. Elena stared at the printout and thought about the unknown number sending her messages. Someone who knew about Box 2847. Someone who wanted her to find the Sterling Room. Someone who was inside Dominic's organization and had been waiting 3 years for her to come back. Her phone buzzed again. The message was longer this time. He'll run. You have maybe 6 hours before everything disappears. The Sterling Room has what you need, but you need to move fast.
And Agent Ravencroft? Your mother is being moved to a facility upstate tomorrow morning. Make sure she arrives safely. Elena's blood went cold. The message was both reassurance and threat. Someone was protecting Charlotte, which meant someone also had access to hurt her. She showed Nathan the message. His face went grim. We need to move now. Get tactical teams to the Sterling Room immediately. And we need protection on your mother. Elena was already dialing.
The nursing facility answered on the 3rd ring, and the night supervisor confirmed that Charlotte was sleeping peacefully in her room. Elena requested enhanced security, citing unspecified threats. The supervisor agreed immediately, probably used to families with complicated situations requiring discretion. Nathan's phone rang. He listened for 30 seconds, then his face transformed into something Elena had never seen before. Pure, undiluted rage. He hung up and his voice was very quiet, very controlled. Judge Hendricks denied the suppression motion. Dominic's arrest stands. All evidence is admissible. Maxwell Brennan's emergency petition was rejected. Elena felt relief flood through her, so intense it was almost painful. We won? Nathan's expression suggested the answer was more complicated. We won the first round, but Brennan is appealing to the circuit court. This isn't over. Elena looked at the printout in her hands, at the evidence from 3 years ago that someone had hidden and protected and finally revealed. She thought about Dominic Hayes sitting in an interrogation room with his $5,000 per hour lawyer, confident that money and connections would eventually secure his release. She thought about Augustus St. Clair, broken and terrified, willing to testify if it meant protecting his daughter. She thought about Evangeline, whose life was being dismantled by revelations about her father's crimes. And she thought about her own father, running into a burning building because that was what heroes did, dying because other people had looked away. Her voice was steady. Then we make sure round 2 counts. We get to the Sterling Room before Dominic's people can destroy evidence. We find whatever he's been hiding, and we make a case so airtight that no lawyer and no judge and no amount of money can make it disappear. Nathan nodded slowly. Tactical team is mobilizing now. Warrants are being processed. We move at dawn. Elena checked her watch. Dawn was 90 minutes away. Outside the windows of Federal Plaza, the city was starting to wake up. The first hints of gray light touched the skyline. In 2 hours, markets would open and news would spread, and the full weight of what had happened tonight would become real for everyone involved. Elena thought about the unknown number, the mysterious informant who had been guiding her toward the Sterling room. Whoever they were, they had been inside Dominic's organization long enough to know details that even Nathan's investigation had missed.
Which meant they were either an ally with their own agenda, or they were manipulating her towards something she couldn't see yet. Either way, she was committed now. The operation was blown, the arrests were made, and the only direction was forward into whatever came next. Her phone buzzed one final time. The message was just 2 words. Trust yourself. Elena stared at the screen and wondered if that was advice or warning. The Sterling room occupied the 47th floor of a glass tower on Columbus Circle, and at 5:45 a.m., it was dark, except for emergency lighting that cast long shadows across marble floors. Elena rode up in the service elevator with Nathan and 6 members of the FBI tactical team, all of them wearing body armor over street clothes because speed had trumped protocol. The warrant had been signed by a federal magistrate at 5:15, roused from sleep by Nathan's call explaining exigent circumstances and imminent destruction of evidence. They had 90 minutes, maybe less, before Dominic's lawyers realized what was happening and started filing injunctions. The elevator doors opened onto a corridor that smelled like expensive cologne and furniture polish. Elena stepped out first, her weapon drawn despite knowing the restaurant should be empty at this hour. Nathan had confirmed with building security that no one had entered the floor since closing last night at 11. But the messages from the unknown number had made her paranoid, made her think about all the ways this could be a trap. Trust yourself. The tactical team spread out, clearing rooms with efficient silence. Elena and Nathan moved toward the main dining area, a space that looked similar to the Gilded Swan but somehow more predatory. Where the Gilded Swan had been opulent, the Sterling room was austere. Black marble, chrome fixtures, artwork that probably cost 6 figures per piece. The kind of place where money didn't whisper. It simply existed, obvious and undeniable. Nathan's voice was barely audible. According to blueprints, there's a private office suite at the north end. That's where we start. They moved through the empty restaurant, footsteps echoing despite efforts at stealth. Elena's heart was hammering against her ribs, adrenaline fighting exhaustion for control of her nervous system. She had been awake for 22 hours. Her body wanted to shut down. Her mind knew that wasn't an option. The office suite was locked, but the tactical team's entry specialist had it open in under 30 seconds. The door swung inward to reveal a space that looked more like a corporate boardroom than a restaurant office. Conference table, leather chairs, wall-mounted screens, and at the far end, a desk that made Augustus St. Clair's look like furniture from a student apartment. Nathan gestured to the team. Document everything. Photographs before we touch anything. Chain of custody starts now. Elena moved toward the desk while agents began cataloging the room. The surface was empty except for a single laptop, closed, plugged into a docking station. She photographed it from multiple angles, then carefully opened the lid. The screen lit up immediately, no password protection, which should have been her first warning that something was wrong. The desktop showed a single folder labeled Ravencroft. Elena's hands froze on the keyboard. Nathan appeared at her shoulder, his breathing sharp. That's not coincidence. Elena clicked the folder. Inside were dozens of files, all video. The first one was titled, March 15th, 2022, Federal Plaza. She double-clicked it. The video showed her in an interrogation room 3 years ago, facing Dominic Hayes across a table. Her own voice, younger and more certain, explaining the evidence she had collected about financial irregularities at multiple restaurants. Dominic asking questions, taking notes, playing the role of concerned supervisor reviewing a subordinate's work. Elena watched her past self hand over documents, explain connections, show Dominic everything she had found. The video cut to black, then text appeared. He knew. You told him everything. Elena's stomach lurched. Someone had been recording her original investigation, had documented the moment she gave Dominic the tools to destroy her.
Nathan's voice was tight. "This is surveillance footage from inside the bureau. Someone had access to our interview rooms." Elena clicked the next video. This one showed her apartment 3 years ago, the small studio in Brooklyn where she had lived before everything fell apart. The camera angle suggested it was mounted somewhere near the ceiling. The footage showed her coming home from work, making dinner, sitting at her laptop reviewing case files. There was no audio, but Elena remembered that night. She had been compiling evidence for warrant applications, certain she was close to breaking the case. The video showed her falling asleep at the desk. Then a figure entered the frame from outside the camera's view. The person's face was obscured by shadow, but their movements were purposeful. They approached Elena's laptop, inserted a flash drive, and spent approximately 4 minutes typing. Then they removed the drive and left. Elena felt cold spread through her chest. Someone had been in her apartment, had accessed her computer while she slept, had planted the evidence that would later be used to accuse her of corruption. The text appeared again. "You were always being watched." Nathan's hands were clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. "This is proof. Proof that you were framed. Proof that evidence was planted. We need to secure this immediately." Elena clicked through more videos. Surveillance footage from outside her mother's care facility, Charlotte being wheeled through the gardens by a nurse, unaware she was being filmed. Footage from inside Meadowbrook, showing Charlotte's room, her belongings, the medication schedule posted on the wall. The message was clear. We can reach her anytime we want. Elena's finger hovered over the next file, then clicked it despite knowing she wouldn't like what she saw. This video showed the Gilded Swan 2 weeks ago. Elena serving table 12, pouring wine, clearing plates. The angle was wrong for security cameras, too intimate. Someone had been filming her specifically, tracking her movements through her shifts. Then the video cut to Federal Plaza, Nathan entering the building, Nathan meeting with other agents in conference rooms, Nathan's office, his safe, the combination visible as he opened it to retrieve files. Someone had been watching the entire investigation from inside the bureau itself. Nathan's face had gone gray. "We have a leak. Someone on the inside has been feeding information to Dominic." Elena's mind was cataloging implications, running through lists of people who had access to interview rooms and Nathan's office and surveillance capabilities. It wasn't a long list. Maybe 20 people in the entire New York field office had clearance for that level of access, which meant the mole was someone Nathan trusted, someone they both trusted. The tactical team's leader appeared in the doorway. "We've got a problem. Building security just called. Someone tried to access this floor 2 minutes ago using a key card that was reported stolen 3 months ago. Security detained them in the lobby." Nathan was already moving. "Get them up here. I want to know who they are and what they're doing in this building at 6 a.m. Elena stared at the laptop screen, at the folder full of videos documenting 3 years of surveillance. Someone had been watching her entire life, had documented her investigation, her framing, her disgrace, had followed her to her mother's facility, had tracked Nathan's operation from the beginning, and then they had left this laptop here, unlocked, waiting for her to find it. The question was, why? Her phone buzzed. The unknown number. "The person in the lobby is a gift, but the real evidence is in the sub-basement. Server room. You have 30 minutes before remote wipe initiates." Elena showed Nathan the message as building security brought a young woman up in the elevator. She was maybe 25, dressed in business casual, and looked absolutely terrified. Her ID badge identified her as Rachel Morrison, junior analyst in the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Nathan's voice was very quiet, very controlled. "Agent Morrison, why are you in this building at 6 in the morning attempting to access a crime scene?" Rachel's voice trembled. "I got a call. Someone said Agent Ravencroft was in danger, that there was evidence here that would be destroyed if I didn't secure it immediately. They told me to use the backup keycard from evidence lockup and get to the 47th floor." Elena felt pieces clicking into place. "Who called you?" Rachel shook her head. "I don't know. The number was blocked."
But they knew details about the investigation, knew Agent Ravencroft's cover had been blown, knew about the raids tonight. I thought... Her voice cracked. I thought I was helping. Nathan's expression suggested he was doing complex calculations about trust and betrayal. You removed evidence from a secure facility and entered an active crime scene without authorization. That's at minimum grounds for suspension, possibly criminal charges. Rachel's face crumpled. I was trying to help. I didn't know. I thought... Elena stepped forward. How long have you worked financial crimes? Rachel wiped her eyes. 8 months. This is my first major case. Elena exchanged glances with Nathan. Rachel was too junior, too new to be the inside source who had been feeding Dominic information for 3 years. Which meant she was exactly what she appeared to be, a tool being used by someone else. Elena's voice gentlened. Did you tell anyone you were coming here? Rachel nodded miserably. My supervisor. I texted him from the car, said I had a lead on the Sterling room and was checking it out. Nathan's face hardened. Who's your supervisor? Rachel's voice was barely audible. Assistant Director Marcus Webb. The name hit Elena like cold water. Marcus Webb had been with the Bureau for 20 years, had built his reputation on major financial crime cases, had been the one who testified at her disciplinary hearing 3 years ago, supporting Dominic's accusations. Nathan's hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone. We need to lock down the field office immediately. If Webb knows we're here, he's already destroying evidence. Elena was already moving toward the door. The message said sub-basement server room. If this building is connected to Dominic's network, that's where the real data is stored. They found the server room 2 floors below street level, accessed through a maintenance corridor that required 3 separate key cards to navigate. The tactical team had to cut through the final door because none of their credentials worked on the electronic lock. Inside was a room that looked like something from a tech company rather than a restaurant. Rows of servers, climate control keeping everything at precisely controlled temperature, cable management that suggested professional installation. This wasn't storage space for reservation systems or inventory management. This was serious computing infrastructure. Elena approached the nearest terminal and found it already active. Screens displaying what looked like financial data streaming in real time. Bank transfers, cryptocurrency wallets, shell corporation transactions. The volume was staggering. Hundreds of millions of dollars moving through accounts, being split and recombined and routed through layers of corporate entities so complex that tracking any single transaction would require weeks of forensic analysis. Nathan was photographing screens, documenting everything. This is the hub. Every restaurant in the network was feeding data here. The Sterling room wasn't just another location. It was command and control. Elena's eyes tracked the data flows, looking for patterns. Most transactions were small, under $10,000, the threshold that triggered automatic reporting requirements. But the cumulative volume was massive. She pulled up transaction histories and started calculating. Her voice came out hollow. 400 million is low. Way low. Based on what I'm seeing here, the actual amount moving through this system is closer to 2 billion over 10 years. Nathan stopped photographing. $2 billion. Where's it coming from? Elena clicked through directory structures, looking for source documentation. The servers were organized by account, with cryptic identifiers that would take days to decode. But one folder stood out because it was labeled differently. Instead of alphanumeric codes, it had a single word: Kensington. She opened it and found herself looking at spreadsheets documenting campaign contributions, political action committee donations, and what appeared to be direct payments to offshore accounts. The dates went back 12 years, long before Senator Kensington had been elected to the Senate, back when he had been a state attorney general. Elena's mind was racing through implications. He wasn't just taking bribes now. He was being paid to overlook money laundering when he ran the state AG's office. This goes back over a decade.
Nathan leaned over her shoulder, reading the documents. And if he was protecting the operation as AG, that means he could have influenced prosecutions, buried investigations, made sure certain cases never went forward. Elena thought about her own case 3 years ago, how quickly it had been shut down, how thoroughly her evidence had disappeared. She had assumed it was just Dominic covering his tracks. But if Senator Kensington had been involved at the state level, if he had connections to federal law enforcement through years of working adjacent to the Bureau. Her voice was very quiet. Marcus Webb worked organized crime for 15 years before transferring to financial crimes. He would have interacted with the state AG's office regularly. Nathan's face had gone pale. You think Webb and Kensington have been working together since before the senator was elected? Elena clicked through more files, finding correspondence between email addresses that would need to be traced but showed clear coordination between multiple parties. Planning documents for the restaurant network expansion, risk assessments discussing law enforcement exposure, contingency plans for if investigations got too close, and in one folder labeled Insurance, she found video files. The first video showed Senator Kensington at what appeared to be a private residence, accepting a briefcase from Dominic Hayes. The date stamp was 8 years ago. Kensington opened the briefcase, examined the contents, nodded, and shook Dominic's hand. The second video showed Marcus Webb in the same location, different date, also accepting a briefcase from Dominic. The third video showed both men together with Dominic, discussing something in what looked like a hotel suite. No audio, but the body language suggested negotiation, agreement, partnership. Elena felt her hands trembling as she copied files to an encrypted drive. Dominic was keeping insurance on his partners, documentation that they were complicit. If anything went wrong, he could burn them. Nathan's voice held something that might have been admiration, which means we can flip him. He built a case against his own people. All we have to do is offer him a better deal than what he's facing. An alarm started blaring throughout the server room. Red lights flashed and screens began displaying warning messages. Remote wipe initiated. All data will be purged in 5 minutes. Nathan grabbed the encrypted drive from Elena. Get everything you can. We have 5 minutes before it's gone. Elena's fingers flew across keyboards, copying folders, grabbing files at random, trying to preserve as much as possible before the wipe completed. The tactical team was disconnecting servers from the network, physically removing hard drives, doing everything possible to preserve evidence. But 5 minutes wasn't enough. The system had too much data, too many layers, too many redundancies built in to protect against exactly this kind of seizure. At 3 minutes remaining, the screens went dark. Elena slammed her hand against the desk. Someone triggered the wipe remotely. We didn't get it all. Nathan held up the encrypted drive. But we got enough. The insurance files, the transaction records, the Kensington folder. It's not complete, but it's more than we had an hour ago. The tactical team leader appeared. Building security just reported multiple vehicles arriving in the underground garage. Black SUVs, no plates visible. They're blocking exits. Nathan's weapon was out immediately. How many? The team leader's face was grim. At least 6 vehicles. Estimate 20 to 30 people. They're not identifying themselves. Elena felt her pulse accelerate into dangerous territory. Dominic's people. They're here to destroy evidence. Nathan was already moving toward the exit. We need to evacuate, now. Get every piece of hardware we can carry and get to the vehicles outside. They moved fast, agents grabbing servers and hard drives, loading them into equipment cases. Elena took the encrypted drive from Nathan and secured it in an interior pocket of her body armor. If everything else was lost, that drive contained the most critical evidence. They reached the service elevator and found it disabled. The tactical team leader tried the stairwell door and found it locked from the outside. They were trapped in the sub-basement with hostile forces entering the building. Nathan's voice was calm despite circumstances. We hold position here. This is a defensible location. I'm calling for backup. Elena checked her phone and found no signal. Someone was jamming communications. The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in after 3 seconds, bathing everything in dim red glow. The tactical team had taken positions, covering the corridor leading to the server room. Elena found herself pressed against a wall next to Nathan, her weapon drawn, listening to footsteps echoing from somewhere above. Nathan's whisper was barely audible. "If we can't get backup, we need to negotiate. We have evidence they want. That's leverage." Elena's mind was calculating odds and coming up with nothing good. They're not here to negotiate. They're here to eliminate witnesses and destroy evidence. If we surrender, we're dead. Nathan's expression suggested he had reached the same conclusion. The footsteps grew louder. Multiple people, moving with tactical precision, clearing rooms systematically. Professional. Military trained, or perhaps private security contractors who specialized in operations that required plausible deniability. Elena's phone buzzed, despite the jamming. A text from the unknown number appeared on the screen, somehow bypassing the signal block. North Service Tunnel, behind the third server rack. It connects to the parking structure 2 blocks away. You have maybe 2 minutes. She showed Nathan. His eyes narrowed. Could be a trap. Elena thought about the videos, the surveillance, the 3 years of someone watching her life and documenting everything. Or it could be our only option. Nathan made the decision in less than 5 seconds. Move. Now. Quietly, the tactical team shifted positions, covering their exit while Elena and Nathan moved toward the server racks. Behind the third rack was indeed a service panel, secured with 4 bolts. The entry specialist had it open in 30 seconds, revealing a tunnel that looked like it predated the building above it. Old maintenance access, probably from when this area of Manhattan was still industrial rather than financial. They moved into the tunnel single file, the tactical team bringing up the rear. The passage was narrow, forcing them to move sideways in places, and the darkness was absolute beyond the reach of their flashlights. Elena kept one hand on the wall, following Nathan, trying not to think about structural integrity or what happened if the passage collapsed. Behind them, the sound of voices echoed. Someone had found the open service panel. The tactical team leader's whisper carried through the darkness. "Contact. Moving to intercept." Gunfire erupted, impossibly loud in the confined space. Elena flinched, ears ringing, kept moving forward because stopping meant dying. Nathan was pulling her along now, both of them running through darkness, while behind them, the tactical team engaged in a firefight that would probably end with them all dead or captured. The tunnel opened suddenly into a larger chamber that appeared to be an old subway platform, abandoned and sealed off decades ago. Graffiti covered the walls, and trash suggested homeless populations had used this space before it got secured. Nathan's phone showed signal again. He was already calling for backup, voice clipped and professional despite the chaos. "Federal agents under fire. Current location, Columbus Circle sub-level access tunnels. Request immediate tactical support and medical." Elena heard the response even though the phone wasn't on speaker. "Units dispatched. ETA 15 minutes. 15 minutes was an eternity. The gunfire behind them had stopped, which meant either the tactical team had won or been overwhelmed. Elena's mind refused to calculate which was more likely. Nathan spotted an exit tunnel and they ran toward it, emerging into what looked like parking structure maintenance area. Stairs led up to ground level. They took them 2 at a time, legs burning, lungs screaming for air. They emerged on West 58th Street, half a block from Columbus Circle, into morning rush hour beginning to build. Normal people going to normal jobs, drinking coffee from paper cups, checking phones, completely unaware that 2 federal agents had just escaped what amounted to an ambush in the sub-basement of a restaurant. Nathan's hand was tight on Elena's arm. "We need to get to Federal Plaza. This evidence needs to be secured immediately." Elena's mind was trying to process what had just happened. Someone had tried to kill them, had known they would be at the Sterling Room, had been waiting with enough people and firepower to overwhelm a tactical team, which meant the leak went deeper than Marcus Webb.
Her phone buzzed. The unknown number. Webb is gone. Cleared out his office an hour ago, but he left something in your old desk. Third drawer down, false bottom. You should look. Elena showed Nathan as they reached their vehicle. He read the message and his face hardened. It's another trap. Has to be. Elena thought about the surveillance videos, about 3 years of someone watching and documenting and protecting her mother and leading her toward evidence. Or it's someone inside who wants us to win. They drove to Federal Plaza in silence, both scanning for tails, watching for signs they were being followed. The building appeared normal as they entered, agents going about morning routines, no indication that one of their own had just fled after compromising an active investigation. Nathan went to coordinate securing the evidence from the Sterling room, while Elena headed for the Financial Crimes Division. Her old desk was exactly where she remembered it, now occupied by a junior agent who looked up in confusion as Elena approached. She flashed her credentials. I need to access this desk. Official investigation. The junior agent vacated immediately, and Elena pulled open the third drawer. It looked empty, except for standard office supplies. She felt along the bottom and found a seam. Pressed, and a false panel popped open. Inside was a single flash drive and a handwritten note. The note was in handwriting she didn't recognize. You were right 3 years ago. About everything. I'm sorry I couldn't help then. I can help now. This drive contains communications between Webb, Kensington, and Dominic, going back 15 years. It's enough to put all of them away. But you need to move fast. They're planning to disappear. Webb is already gone. Kensington has a private jet fueled at Teterboro. Dominic has a dead man switch. If he doesn't check in every 12 hours, everything gets released to the media. All the surveillance, all the compromising videos of federal agents and politicians, everything. You have until tomorrow morning. Make it count. A friend you've never met. Elena stared at the note, trying to understand motivations. Someone inside the conspiracy had been working against it, had been documenting crimes, collecting evidence, waiting for the right moment to act, and they had chosen Elena as their instrument. She took the flash drive and the note directly to Nathan's office. He was on the phone coordinating with the U.S. Attorney's office, face grim. He ended the call when he saw her expression. She handed him the note. Nathan read it twice, then looked at the flash drive like it might explode. This doesn't make sense. Why would someone inside the conspiracy sabotage their own operation? Elena had been asking herself the same question since the first message appeared. Maybe they weren't inside willingly. Maybe they were trapped the same way Augustus was. Leverage, threats, no way out except helping us from the shadows. Nathan plugged the flash drive into his computer using an isolated terminal that wasn't connected to the main network. The contents loaded slowly, file after file of emails, recorded phone calls, financial documents. Years of evidence, meticulously organized, annotated, cross-referenced. Whoever had compiled this had been building a case just as thoroughly as Elena had been running her undercover operation. Nathan's voice was very quiet. This is it. This is everything we need. Webb, Kensington, Dominic, the whole conspiracy. It's all here. Elena felt something loosen in her chest. Tension that had been building for 3 years finally finding release. Then we move now. Arrest warrants for Webb and Kensington. We get Dominic to flip using the insurance videos. We end this. Nathan was already making calls, voice sharp with urgency. Elena watched him coordinate with the U.S. Attorney, with tactical teams, with the Director's Office in D.C. Watch the machinery of federal law enforcement mobilized to take down a sitting senator and an assistant director of the FBI. Her phone buzzed, the unknown number one final time. Your mother is being moved to a secure facility as we speak. FBI protection. She'll be safe there until this is over. Good luck, Agent Ravencroft. You earned this. Elena tried to call the number. It rang once and disconnected, then showed as no longer in service. Whoever had been helping her was gone.
Nathan ended his calls, and his face showed something that might have been satisfaction. Marcus Webb was stopped at LaGuardia trying to board a flight to Grand Cayman. He's in custody. Senator Kensington's jet at Teterboro has been grounded pending investigation. FAA is holding him there. We have warrants for both of them. Elena felt her legs go weak. She sat down hard in one of Nathan's chairs and tried to process that it was actually happening. What about Dominic's dead man switch? Nathan's expression was grim. That's our next problem. We have until tomorrow morning to either disarm it or convince Dominic that cooperating is his best option. Elena thought about the insurance videos, about Dominic keeping documentation on everyone involved in the conspiracy. He built a case against his own partners. He knows you need sleep before you make decisions about prosecutorial strategy. Elena wanted to argue, but her body was already shutting down, adrenaline crash finally overwhelming willpower. She had been awake for 26 hours. Her hands were shaking. Her vision was blurring at the edges. Nathan's voice was gentle. Go home. Sleep for 6 hours. We'll reconvene this afternoon and plan next steps. The evidence isn't going anywhere. Webb and Kensington are in custody. Dominic is locked down. She woke to pounding on her door and afternoon light streaming through windows. Her phone showed 4 p.m., which meant she had been asleep for 8 hours instead of the 6 Nathan had suggested. Her body still felt like it had been beaten with hammers, but her mind was clear for the first time in days. The pounding continued. Elena checked the security camera she had installed after being framed 3 years ago and found Nathan standing in her hallway looking agitated. She opened the door. What happened? Nathan pushed past her into the apartment. Dominic made bail 2 hours ago, posted by an anonymous benefactor. He's gone. Elena felt the floor tilt. Gone? How is that possible? He was being held without bail. Nathan's face was ashen. Maxwell Brennan filed an emergency motion arguing that the evidence seized from the Sterling room was obtained illegally because we exceeded the scope of our warrant. Judge Hendricks agreed and ordered Dominic released pending further hearings. Elena's mind was racing through implications. The dead man's switch. If he's free, he can trigger it manually. Nathan nodded grimly. We have people watching his known addresses, but he's not at any of them. He's running, and he's got resources we don't fully understand. Elena was already moving toward her laptop. The surveillance videos. Someone was watching Dominic's operation for years. They might know where he would go if he needed to disappear. She pulled up the files they had recovered from the Sterling room and started going through them systematically, looking for patterns. The surveillance had been comprehensive, documenting not just Elena's investigation, but also Dominic's movements, his associates, his routines. One file showed Dominic entering a building in Red Hook, Brooklyn. The timestamp was recent, within the past month. Elena cross-referenced the address and found it registered to a shell corporation that traced back to the same network of entities used for money laundering. Her voice was tight. I think I know where he is. Nathan was already calling for tactical support. We need to move carefully. If he triggers that dead man's switch, years of surveillance on federal agents and politicians goes public. The Bureau's reputation will be destroyed. Elena thought about the videos she had seen, about herself being filmed without knowledge or consent, about Charlotte at her care facility being documented as leverage. Let it burn. If that's what it takes to put Dominic away, let the whole thing burn, and we'll rebuild from the ashes. Nathan's expression suggested he didn't entirely disagree. They assembled a team and drove to Red Hook in 3 vehicles, arriving at the address just as sunset was painting the sky orange and purple. The building was a converted warehouse, probably housing expensive lofts for people who wanted industrial aesthetic without actual industrial labor. Nathan had obtained a warrant en route, signed by a different judge after explaining Judge Hendricks's apparent bias. They had legal authority to enter and search. The tactical team breached the door to the 3rd-floor unit and found it empty except for computer equipment and Dominic Hayes sitting calmly at a desk, fingers poised over a keyboard. His voice was conversational, almost friendly. Agent Ravencroft, Agent Cordovan, I was wondering how long it would take you to find me. Nathan's weapon was drawn and aimed. Step away from the computer, Mr. Hayes. Dominic smiled. Or what? You'll shoot me? That would be unfortunate. My finger is currently on the enter key. If I release pressure, or if my heart rate drops below 60 beats per minute, the dead man switch activates. Everything I've collected over 15 years gets uploaded to every major news outlet simultaneously. Elena felt ice in her veins. You're bluffing. That kind of system requires constant monitoring. You can't maintain that pressure indefinitely. Dominic's smile widened. You're right. I can probably hold this position for maybe 6 hours before muscle fatigue becomes unmanageable. So I suggest we have a conversation very quickly about terms of my surrender. Nathan's voice was flat. There are no terms. You're under arrest for money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy, and about 40 other charges. The only question is whether you cooperate and get a reduced sentence, or refuse, and spend the rest of your life in federal prison. Dominic's eyes flicked to Elena. Is that what you think? That this ends with me in prison? And you vindicated? You still don't understand what you're really dealing with. Elena stepped forward despite Nathan's warning glance. Then explain it. You have 6 hours. Use the time. Dominic's finger remained on the enter key, but his posture relaxed slightly. The money laundering operation you've been investigating? That's the smallest part. We were testing a system, proof of concept. The real operation is magnitudes larger. Nathan's voice held skepticism. You're claiming there's a bigger conspiracy than $2 billion moving through shell corporations? Dominic nodded. The restaurants were retail. Small transactions, high volume, relatively low risk. But the infrastructure we built? That same system is being used to move money for corporate interests, foreign governments, entities that make drug cartels look like children playing with monopoly money. Elena felt her chest tighten. And Senator Kensington was protecting all of it? Dominic's laugh was bitter. Kensington is a mid-level player, useful because of his committee assignment, but ultimately replaceable. There are 17 other senators involved, 43 members of the House, and at least 6 federal judges. This isn't a conspiracy. It's infrastructure. It's how the system actually works once you get past the civics textbook version. Nathan's weapon hadn't lowered. And you expect us to believe this without evidence? Dominic's eyes flicked toward his computer screen. The evidence is here. Everything. Names, amounts, documentation of every transaction, every bribe, every compromised official. It's my insurance policy. The reason I'm still alive despite being a liability to very powerful people. Elena thought about the unknown messenger, about the videos and the surveillance and the meticulous documentation. Someone else had access to your insurance files. They've been copying your evidence, building their own case. Dominic's confidence flickered for the first time. That's not possible. My security is... Elena cut him off. Your security was compromised years ago. Someone inside your operation has been feeding information to the FBI. They're the reason we found the Sterling room. They're the reason we have evidence against Webb and Kensington. They've been sabotaging you from the inside. Dominic's face went pale. Who? Who was it? Elena shook her head. I don't know. They never identified themselves, but they knew everything about your operation, which means they were someone you trusted. Dominic's finger trembled on the enter key. For the first time since Elena had met him 3 years ago, he looked genuinely frightened. His voice was very quiet. If what you're saying is true, then releasing this information is the only thing keeping me alive. Without it, I'm a loose end. They'll tie me up the same way they've tied up everyone else who became inconvenient. Nathan lowered his weapon slightly. Then give us the information. Testify. We'll put you in witness protection, give you a new identity, relocate you somewhere safe. Dominic laughed, the sound hollow. You think witness protection means anything against the people I'm describing? They have reach everywhere.
Federal marshals, local police, private security. There's nowhere I could hide that they wouldn't eventually find me. Elena felt frustration building. Then what do you want? What's the endgame here? Dominic's eyes met hers, and she saw something that looked like resignation. I want the same thing you do, Agent Ravencroft. I want justice. Real justice. Not the pretend version where we arrest a few people and everyone pretends the system works. I want to burn down the entire structure and rebuild it into something that actually serves the people it's supposed to protect. Elena stared at him, trying to determine if he was being sincere or manipulative. You destroyed my career, framed me for corruption, cost me 3 years of my life. Now you expect me to believe you care about justice? Dominic's voice was flat, emotionless. I destroyed your career because I was ordered to, by people who were afraid you were getting too close to information that could expose the larger operation. I didn't have a choice. They would have killed you if I hadn't found another way to neutralize the threat. Elena felt her hands clench into fists. So you framed me to save my life? Is that what you're claiming? Dominic nodded slowly. The corruption charges were survivable. Getting labeled a whistleblower who exposed the wrong people would have been a death sentence. I chose the option that let you live. Nathan's voice was sharp. That's a convenient rationalization for ruining someone's career. Dominic's finger was still on the enter key, but his eyes never left Elena's. Believe what you want. I'm telling you the truth as I understand it. You were collateral damage in a much larger war. And now we're on the same side, whether you like it or not. Elena thought about the surveillance videos, about being filmed for years without knowing, about someone inside Dominic's organization feeding her information and protecting her mother. The person who's been helping me, were they trying to save me too? Dominic's expression shifted into something that might have been respect. If someone inside my operation was feeding you evidence, then they were smarter than I gave them credit for. And braver. Because if I find out who it was, he paused. Actually, it doesn't matter now. Everything's falling apart anyway. His finger lifted off the enter key. Nathan's weapon came back up immediately. Don't move! But Dominic was already raising his hands. Relax, I'm not triggering anything. I'm surrendering. Because Agent Ravencroft is right. If my security was compromised years ago, then my insurance policy is worthless. Might as well cooperate and hope federal prison is safer than staying free. The tactical team moved in, securing Dominic and his computer equipment. Elena watched them work and felt none of the satisfaction she had expected. 3 years of anger and resentment, and the actual moment of victory felt hollow. Nathan appeared at her shoulder. We got him. It's over. Elena looked at the computer screens displaying evidence of a conspiracy that apparently stretched far beyond anything they had imagined. No. It's just beginning. They transported Dominic back to Federal Plaza and spent the next 12 hours going through his files. The scope of what he had documented was staggering. 17 senators, 43 House members, 6 federal judges, multiple state attorneys general, dozens of corporate executives. A network of corruption so extensive that dismantling it would require coordinated investigations across multiple jurisdictions for years. The U.S. Attorney's Office was already talking about formation of a special task force, about grand juries and RICO indictments, and prosecutions that would define careers. Elena sat in an interview room at 3 a.m., exhausted beyond measure, watching through one-way glass as prosecutors debriefed Dominic. He was cooperating fully, providing names and evidence and testimony that would put dozens of powerful people in prison. Nathan brought her coffee that had gone cold hours ago. You should go home. Get real sleep. This is going to take months to process. Elena couldn't look away from Dominic's face. Do you believe him? That he framed me to save my life? Nathan was quiet for a long moment. I believe he's a sociopath who's very good at manipulating people into seeing him as sympathetic. Whether he's telling the truth
or constructing a narrative that makes him look better doesn't really matter at this point. What matters is the evidence he's providing.
Elena thought about the unknown messenger, about 3 years of surveillance and protection and guidance. Someone inside his organization spent years helping me, documenting evidence, protecting my mother, leading me toward the Sterling room. I need to know who it was. Nathan's expression was sympathetic but firm. Some questions don't have answers. Some allies stay anonymous. You have to make peace with that. Elena's phone buzzed. She pulled it out expecting another message from the unknown number. Instead, it was from Meadowbrook Senior Living. The message was short. Charlotte has been asking for you. She's having a good day. You should visit. Elena looked at Nathan. I need to see my mother. He nodded. Go. The evidence isn't going anywhere. Take time to remember why you do this job. Elena drove to Meadowbrook as the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. She found Charlotte in the garden, sitting in a wheelchair, watching birds at a feeder. Charlotte looked up as Elena approached, and recognition dawned in her eyes. Elena, my daughter, you came. Elena felt tears burning her throat. I'm here, Mom. I'm always here. Charlotte reached out and took Elena's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Your father would be proud of you. Standing up to powerful people, fighting for what's right. He always said that was the most important thing. Elena squeezed her mother's hand and felt something inside her finally break open. The anger, the resentment, the 3 years of carrying weight alone. It all came pouring out in tears that she couldn't stop and didn't try to. Charlotte held her hand through it all, present and lucid, and exactly who Elena needed her to be in that moment. And maybe that was enough.